Hi, I'm Doug Barry. Welcome to the US Grace Force Podcast. We have a fantastic guest tonight and a very important topic to discuss. Before we get started, though, I want to tell you about the WWIII Coalition online monthly training membership. The doors are open right now. Now, we only open the doors twice a year. We are opening them now through the end of March 15th. I encourage you going out to brcoalition.com. Pray about it. Look through what we have to offer. This is a great way to be better trained body, mind, and soul. And you know, we're called to do that every day of our lives, to really be doing something every day of our lives to take care of ourselves spiritually, physically, mentally, to be better prepared to do the will of God, to make a gift of ourselves to others, as St. John Paul II says. But how much more so in the times we're living in right now, where every day in the news we see something that seems to scream out, we need more godly, loving, trusting, well-trained heroes to step up and engage in the battles that are going on in our world right now on so many different levels. So please go on out to brcoalition.com. Again, pray about it. Look through what we have. Remember, the doors are only open through the end of March 15th. I hope to see you inside the WWIII Coalition.
We are a hair's breadth away from World War III. I mean, it's impossible to deny that. And maybe World War III has already started, right? I mean, if that hair's breadth is passed, if we hit one more tripwire, historians are going to look back and say World War III began with the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Welcome, everybody. This is the US Grace Force Podcast. Doug Barry here, along with Father Richard Heilman, my very good friend. We have a recurring guest. We can't really get rid of him, but we really don't want to because he's a really good guy.
Last time you were on, I think you had COVID. It just popped in my head.
Oh, I think you did.
Yeah.
Possible.
And you challenged yourself to go through it.
Well, Father, I thought I was the new co-host.
That's right.
I thought I was the new co-host.
That's right.
Doug was our guest. Doug, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be with you guys. I appreciate the chance to be on the US Grace Force Podcast. Very popular, one of the most popular Catholic podcasts out there, I think. So, but seriously, everybody, we want to begin with a prayer. And of course, we always turn that over to Father. Father, take it away.
In the name of the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, amen. Amen. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our defense against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly hosts, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, amen. Did you guys notice I was doing that in my radio voice? Saint Michael the Archangel, defend him in battle. I got a new reader at church, and he's a radio disc jockey. He gets up there, a reading from the letter of Paul to the Corinthians. Anyway, I digress.
I actually did notice it, Father. I did notice it.
Did you really?
I did.
Yeah.
But it sounded good. It was a good radio voice. Yeah. Yeah.
I was expecting you to announce a Journey song. Going out from Frank to Kathy, we have happy 4th anniversary.
Oh, those are the days, huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So Jason Jones is with us tonight. Jason, you came to mind right away when Father and I were talking about really wanting to address the Ukraine situation. I mean, it is a very serious situation. This is right down your alley. You have been dealing with human rights issues for quite a while. And I know you were all over the Afghanistan, really, I don't even know what you call that, debacle, or just the craziness of the way the U.S. pulled out and all the problems since then. And I know we want to talk about that a little bit too, because there's still a lot of chaos and a lot of suffering going on, even though we're not hearing about it in the news anymore. Let me just preface by saying this. You go to Mass on Sunday Mass, and God bless the priests out there. I got nothing negative to say about the priests. That's not what I'm doing here, anybody. But there is something about all of us sitting in the pews, and we know the gas prices are going up. We hear that the cost of a barrel of oil is at 127 or whatever it is today. I forget what it is now, but they're talking possibly $200 by the end of the month. I mean, just incredible numbers. A lot of this has to do now with what's going on in the Ukraine and Russia. You got all these nations kicking in one way or the other. Russia's trying to connect with Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua. There's this so-called ironclad, quote unquote, according to China, agreement with China or relationship. And yet China's doing some weird things also, seeing the progression of this. This Iran nuclear deal is being talked about again. Meanwhile, you got NATO talking about potentially sending jet fighters over, gets the green light from Blinken here in the US. And could this escalate? Putin says sanctions look like a declaration of war. All of this is and it's unfolding pretty quickly, Jason, in the last couple of weeks. And I know you've got some insight that Father and I don't have because of your connections with people and the work that you're doing, trying to help people in the Ukraine right now. But before we get into the Afghanistan situation, can you give the audience, I mean, we're hearing terms like World War III. I mean, the fact that we may be a breath away, we may just be a trigger from something being launched in the wrong place, or an accident might happen, or an escalation based on something that just wasn't predicted or expected. And yet we know with people like Klaus Schwab and the Great Reset, dictator minds that are out there, all of this is just a mess. What's your take on what's happening, Jason, from what you know and your experience in all of this?
Well, first of all, it's a privilege to be on your show, and in the midst of the work we're doing, it's just a little comforting to get to spend time with the both of you tonight. And I'm also glad, Doug, that you brought up Afghanistan, because there are more civilians dying every day in Afghanistan right now than in the Ukraine. And the UN predicts 1 million children will die when this winter's over from hunger and from exposure, because it's the cold winter and not access to coal and other fuel for heat. Man. So Afghanistan, although it's been off, it's been shoved from the shelves, and people aren't hearing about it. It's a catastrophe, and it's shameful, and that's why the media is not talking about it, because it's a catastrophe that the Biden administration caused with its reckless and thoughtless retreat from Afghanistan. But when you look at what's happening in Ukraine, John Zmirak and I wrote a book that really I've been working on for 20 years. And John and I wrote this book that came out in 2014, the 100th anniversary of World War I and the Armenian genocide. And when we wrote that book, we said that we wrote that book because we saw clearly that we were careening towards a century of genocides, democides, and total wars that would make the wars and genocides of the 20th century pale in comparison. And you have to know, even our publisher thought it was a bit hyperbolic, and we were paranoid. We even had 60 pages in our book on Ukraine that the editors removed. They said, who wants to read? You can't go on and on and on and on about Russia and Ukraine relationships. Now, this was in 2014. I think when we published the 10th anniversary edition of The Race to Save Our Century, where we look back at the genocides that have happened since 2014 and the wars that happened, we're going to have to put those pages into the next, the 10th anniversary edition of the book. So, yeah, I mean, I believe we are a hair's breadth away from World War III. I mean, it's impossible to deny that. And maybe World War III has already started, right? I mean, if that hair's breadth is passed, if we hit one more tripwire, historians are going to look back and say World War III began with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And thoughtful historians will look back even further to probably the early 90s with the collapse and dissolution of the Soviet Union, and how NATO and the United States were faithless to their commitment to the people of Eastern Europe and Russia, that we wanted to defeat communism in the East to free the people of the East. But when we look back, we can see that we've never stopped our aggression towards Russia. It's been ceaseless. And that is not to excuse Putin. Putin launched an unjust and immoral war, and I don't know how any Christian or Catholic can justify that. But that doesn't mean that his concerns, and the concerns of not just Putin, but his generals and others in Russia, that they had understandable concerns. Just like it's unthinkable for us to allow a coup in Canada to install a pro-Russian government that would then move to form a military alliance with Russia and then place Russian missiles in Canada pointing at us. As unthinkable as that is for us, think of the Cuban Missile Crisis, right. Which isn't even our culturally Anglo culture, but to the Russians, Ukraine, their brothers, which makes us all the more sorrowful. The idea of Ukraine joining NATO has always been understood to be a red line, and a red line that no thoughtful statesman in the West would dare cross, partly out of concern for the people of Ukraine, right? Obviously, our expansion and our eastward aggression has been a tragedy for the people of Ukraine. So Putin doesn't care about the people of Ukraine. NATO and the regimes of the West don't care about the people of Ukraine. Ukraine is a pawn. It's a buffer. It's a buffer for the West with Russia, and it's a buffer for Russia with NATO. So what we as Catholics, just as people are ends in themselves, right? Not merely means to our end, but they're ends in themselves. Groups of people are ends in themselves. The people of Ukraine are ends in themselves. They're not, that community does not exist to provide a buffer for France and Germany with Russia. We have to be thoughtful to the interests of the people of Ukraine. And the we don't have statesmen and stateswomen anymore, do we? I don't see anyone out there really trying to I don't see it when I even look at the commentators, East and West. I don't hear people advocating for the concerns of the Ukrainians. It's always in the talk of power politics and geopolitics. To even hear just regular folks sounding so Machiavellian is startling to me.
Mm-hmm. How is it, Jason? We've gone through these last 2 years, especially, but it's been going on obviously for a long time. And it's a new world order. It's these oligarchs that have taken control of the planet, and they have their useful idiots, mainly the influencers of our time, the mainstream media for sure, universities, you could go on, but how are we being lied to right now? Because you get to a point especially after the last 2 years, that it's not a matter of whether they're lying or not. It's what are they lying about? Do you have a sense of that, Jason?
How is the lie being
Are we being
delivered now?
fed a line? Are we being fed something? How are we being lied to right now?
So many of us are being snookered. There are Catholics, I think, that we all respect that are lining up on different positions on the Ukraine-Russia issue, right? And I think they're being snookered on both sides of the debate. There are those who are thoughtlessly taking the position of NATO, and they're saying, look, I wrote in articles laying out how 30 years of aggression, I've actually written 3 articles now, but how 30 years of aggression, never treating the Russians as partners. I'm talking about before Putin. We never treated the people of Russia as partners. We began working to expand NATO from the very beginning. I wrote an article as a graduate student in military science and operational studies in the 90s, calling for the disbanding of NATO. Russia the Soviet Union had broken apart. Their economy was in collapse. And I thought that would have been a very good time to look to them as partners. And Montesquieu wrote that in times of peace, we should work for the best good for other nations. And in times of war, we should seek to win doing the least harm. And we won the Cold War. And I think it's been obvious that we weren't thinking about the good of the Russian people. And Ronald Reagan, if we would have continued with his vision instead of the neoconservative, neoliberal axis of evil that we saw after in the 90s and 2000s, Reagan was obsessed with freeing the people of Russia from totalitarian socialism, freeing the people of Poland. Right before jumping on your show, I met with my dear friend Marek Popescu, Father Jerzy, Blessed Jerzy nephew, who was murdered by the KGB. And so we won the Cold War, but we never stopped the war with Russia. But that doesn't excuse Putin, right? Putin is a thug. I hear Catholics with wishful thinking, daydreaming about this idea that Putin is a crusader against the New World Order. The enemy of your enemy is not always your friend. It's as if they're saying we have to choose between you're either on Klaus Schwab's side or Putin's side. Look,
Right.
stripper pole Putin, has this notorious strip club in his mansion.
Jeez.
He's associated with a despicable, quote unquote, philosopher. I call him the Russian neoconservative, Alexander Dugin, who really is just a propagandist, but he, tries to appeal to anything he can find, Gnostic traditions, Christian traditions, really, but he's just seeking to create ideologies to advance what he perceives as Russian state interest. But he's grounded in Heidegger and Nietzsche, and he talks openly about how Russia should be the country advancing what he calls the anti-logos, which the dark logos, which is quite creepy. So this you'll hear this kind of QAnon kooky talk that this war is about breaking up human sex trafficking rings, and it's a war against Klaus Schwab, and it's quite bizarre. It was an illegal, unjust war that, though, could have been anticipated with the relentless aggression of NATO. So I'm not on. Look, as a Catholic human rights activist, my concern is for the people of Ukraine, and we've evacuated over 5,000 Ukrainians in the past week to Poland. We have an ambulance service. My organization, the Vulnerable People Project, we just purchased an ambulance and a team of combat medics is arriving in Poland tomorrow to pick up our ambulance. We already have 3 shuttle vans and 30 vehicles, over 100 volunteers, Ukrainian, Polish, and Irish volunteers that are to safe house in Poland. And our cars and buses are running 24/7. My job is here to serve the Polish people. Before the invasion of Iraq, I opposed the invasion of Iraq, and I said this invasion will lead to genocide. By the way, St. John Paul the Great said the same thing, that inevitably the order that has crashed will pave the way for extremist ideologies, and the ethnic and religious minorities like the Christians and the Yazidis will suffer. We saw that happen. It took longer than I think most of us had anticipated. The U.S. stayed there longer, but then Obama pulled us out recklessly, sat on his hands while ISIS raped its way across the first century Christian communities of Iraq and Syria and decimated the Yazidi people. And now we saw the same thing in Afghanistan with how thoughtless we were in Afghanistan. But as a Catholic human rights activist, my first concern. But my main point was there. It was hard to tell the truth in 2003 because they called us a lot of names. You're apologist for a dictator. You're a pacifist. Da 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 da. Of course, when I opposed the withdrawal, knowing that it would lead to genocide, all of a sudden I was a warmonger. Then they wanted to topple Assad, which I opposed, and all of a sudden I was a pacifist again. And here, my heart breaks for the Ukrainian people. And by the way, my heart breaks. 1,000 Russian soldiers died today. 1,000 young men. My 15-year-old son is right over there. My oldest son fought ISIS in Iraq and Syria.
Wow.
And my heart breaks for these Russian boys. My heart breaks for the Ukrainians.
Right.
My heart breaks for their families. We need statesmen to rise up and work to a statesman. A stateswoman is somebody who works for the common good to alleviate human suffering. But who do I see on the world stage today? Who do I see that is really working to alleviate the sufferings of the people of Ukraine?
And Jason, there seems to be so many things behind the scenes, like what you're saying here is who's doing this, who's doing it, who's speaking out, who's really trying to set things right. We've got propaganda, we've got a message that's coming out that even in the secular media, if anybody even questions the motives behind wanting to in any way stand up against Putin, like maybe we should reconsider this or that. All of a sudden you're a Putin sympathizer and you're canceled, so to speak, in secular media. This has happened with some of the mainstream, just a handful of the commentators. It's as if that we have to get on board that Putin is evil and Ukraine is fine. Now, the people separate, notwithstanding the actual government leaders who are making things happen. Putin is a bad guy. I mean, we would agree with that, as you mentioned earlier. But questioning the motives behind things that are advancing this or how things are being done doesn't in and of itself automatically mean that you're supporting Russia. Is that making sense?
Yeah, it makes all the sense in the world. The last article I published at the stream, I received a barrage of emails. About half of them accused me of being a Putin apologist. The other half said I'm aligned myself with Klaus Schwab and the New World Order. It's comical. What I said in the article was we need to, the Ukrainian people are an end in of themselves. This isn't about NATO. This isn't about Russia. This is about Ukraine, the people that live in Ukraine. We had to evacuate maternity wards a couple of days ago because Russian armies were barreling down on maternity wards, and we raced pregnant women out. Today, we evacuated a school for the blind. These are human beings. People don't really begin to even understand what it's like to be a refugee, to flee your home, to see the most sophisticated weaponry in the world crash into your city. By God's grace, I hope we as Americans never know what that's like. I know what it's like. I've been in places where, I know the smell of human flesh. I've walked through the chaos and carnage of these sophisticated weapons of war. And but for children and women and families and cousins and aunts and uncles and everyone you went to school with and everyone in your neighborhood and the people that work at the grocery store to all of a sudden, be experiencing this all together as you flee, going to Poland, never knowing when you're going to come home. War is an awful thing. War is an awful thing. And we have these neoconservatives and neoliberals, the establishment on the left and the right. The way they talk about war, they're so giddy. They're so giddy. It is creepy. It is creepy. Because what war is children turning to pink dust in the blink of an eye. War is that son who you love dying with your, mom, dad, the last words from his lips. This is what war is. And there's nothing exciting. War is very boring. When you read the writings of Alexander Dugin, really creepy guy, and he talks about war like Heidegger did, of being this great, a great moment to experience the peak of existence, this kind of nonsense.
And Dugin is in favor of a World War III, is he not?
I mean, he talks like he is. Yeah, this is quite frightening. You know what war is? War is your 19-year-old son with poison gas in his lungs, a bullet in his chest, strung over concertina wire, with birds pecking on his flesh. That's war, okay? Nothing beautiful about that. Now, I'm not a pacifist. I was an infantryman. My dad was an infantryman. My grandfather was an infantryman. My son, I'm a Bears fan. My son's a Packers fan, and he had to go to artillery. So that's that. But we're combat arms. We don't only serve. I'm not a pacifist. But the way that they talk about war and violence so thoughtlessly shows that they're devoid of empathy. And they look at those Ukrainians or those Afghans like pixels on a screen. They're no more real to these politicians than Homer Simpson, Bart Simpson. They're just things, flashes of light they see on a television. But they're human beings.
Yeah, and your article in the stream that you and we'll have a link to it here. People can check it out about both Russia and the West sacrificing Ukraine's people. You go back and talk a little bit about even Hillary Clinton and Biden. And there was obviously that was in the news when Trump was president regarding Biden and all. Can you speak just briefly a little bit about that whole concept? Because this goes back many years, or not a lot of years, in fact. That there's been some dirt even tied into the Ukraine and the Ukraine government not too many years ago.
Yeah, well, and look at chickens come home to roost, right? And this is why you see on the right this sort of idea that Putin, this fantasy, it's going there to clean up our enemies, the partners of Hillary Clinton, the partners of Hunter Biden. This goes way back, and you look at even the Russia dossier, the Russia hoax. There's consequences to these kind of lies that our intelligence community professionals foisted on the American public. They lied not only about President Trump, but they did lie about Russia, right? They lied about this collusion between Trump and Russia, and that was a knife that cut both ways. And the dirty dealings of the Biden family with Ukraine, the Clintons with Ukraine, these chickens can come home to roost now in World War III. But these fantasies that Putin is invading Ukraine to get Nancy Pelosi's laptop that has the secrets of, the Ukraine collusion. This is crazy talk. There's people I love and respect that parrot these things. And that's when I know they're LARPing. That's live action role playing. They're not really thinking about the cost of war and what is happening in the Ukraine right now. So what we should be doing as Catholics is demand that Russia leaves, demand that NATO and the EU stay out. Ukraine should not become a part of NATO. This is not in the interest of the Ukrainians, which we have seen, right? We can see this. And even if Russia left now, they left Chechnya, they came back to Chechnya, right? So there was the Chechen War I, and there was the Chechen War II. The idea is we need statesmen to work for something that serves the interests of the Ukrainians first, and the Russians, and the NATO alliance. And I think we can come to an agreement. And they need to be thoughtful, and there needs to be sacrifice on both sides. But one thing we can do as Americans is acknowledge that we helped lay the tripwire for this war. We did. That is a fact. People tell me, don't say that, just like they told me in 2002 and 2003, don't say not to invade Iraq. No, I will say it, because in 20 years, everyone's going to say it. And I'll refer to this video and say, I said it when you shouldn't say it. We laid the tripwire. NATO laid the tripwire. Ukraine should not become a part of NATO. And we should never have our weapon systems, NATO weapon systems, in Ukraine pointing at Russia, because clearly that creates insecurity, which leads to war and violence, and families dying, civilians dying, famine. Grain production now is collapsing. Last year, because of COVID and the contraction in food production, processing, and distribution, was a great strain on the world food economy. And we can't, it's breaking. And so now with the breadbasket of Europe under siege, we're going to see it's going to have ripple effects around the world. We have now an epic famine in Afghanistan. So we as Catholics, by the way, we as lay Catholics really need to step up and advocate for those communities that are vulnerable. And a lot of the vulnerable people in Ukraine are co-religionists. They're Catholics, they're Orthodox, they're Christians.
Hey, Jason, I was over at my sister's house before we podcast. And so this is her idea, but I think it fits perfectly. She said, Father Rick, what if for every combat rosary, we gave 5% of the sales to some organization that's helping? She, along with me and you and everyone else, just have a heart of all those videos that we're seeing coming in. The women and children, especially, trying to get out, some being killed along the way. It's just heartbreaking. We want to do something. So it's the name of your organization again, Jason, is?
It's the Vulnerable People Project, and our website is thegreatcampaign.org.
Thegreatcampaign.org. We'll put that up. Yep.
And if anyone who donates now for the next 48 hours, we'll give any donation of any size, we'll give a free copy of our book, The Race to Save Our Century, where John Zmirak and I lay out the 5 ideologies that are pushing us towards total war, genocides, and democides. And then
I'm going over there right after the podcast. I want that book, but I want to contribute. But let me say, and she would let me say this too, that if you go to RomanCatholicGear.com and buy the Combat Rosary, 5% of all those sales will go to, say the website to go to again, Jason?
thegreatcampaign.org, and that's the Vulnerable People Project's website. And we got the domain from St. John Paul the Great, who called on us to launch a great campaign in defense of human dignity. Nice. After the fall of the Soviet Union. He said, now we need, it's kind of, I didn't realize that. It was after the fall of the Soviet Union that St. John Paul the Great said, now we need to launch a great campaign to advance the dignity and beauty of the human person.
And she said too, what if we did a rosary campaign? And I said, well, it's an awesome idea, but I think there's like 5 or 50 out there right now that are already doing them. If people want to help, I mean, they want to do something. I would advocate that everybody's doing the 90 days to peace. One of the things we're trying to get discipline at is praying the rosary every day. Please, 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 if you would, add Ukraine to your intentions when you're praying that rosary. But please give to thegreatcampaign.org. And I'm going to do it right when we get off the podcast. And then again, if you want to do it by way of getting a combat rosary, and 5% of all sales will go to the Vulnerable People Project at thegreatcampaign.org. God bless you, Jason. Wow.
Hey, Jason, also the book, The Race to Save Our Century, we've got a trailer on that. When you want to set it up here, and then we'll
Yes,
show the
please.
trailer to everybody?
Yeah, I'm a filmmaker, and the website on the trailer we lost to because this came out 2014. But this book, I got the idea for this book as an undergraduate at the University of Hawaii. And I asked my department, my political science department, if I could make a trailer that they could show undergraduates and why they should major in political science. And I said, because I think we're the most important major, and I want to make a trailer that we can show. And I made a trailer myself, and I showed it to them. And, you know, the Bolsheviks, Marxists that they were, said, yeah, no thanks, Jason, we don't want your trailer, keep it for yourself. But it was making that trailer that gave me the idea to write this book. And so then when I made the book, I said, let's remake the trailer that inspired me to make the book. And that's what this is.
Okay. All right, everybody check this out.
The imperial government fell, revolution reigned, and in violence, chains were broken. But a government needs leaders.
بسم الله والله أكبر.
In my book, we look at the 5 principles that we as Catholics should look to as sort of mountains through the smoke of battle to walk toward. And those are, in the trailer, we talked about the ideologies of evil, but the 5 principles that we as Catholics should seek to advance are, first and foremost, the truth about the human person, our incomparable dignity, beauty, and worth, Christian personalism. The second is the transcendent moral order, that there's a law above the mob, there's a law above the Communist Party, there's a law above Facebook fact checkers, Doug. I know you don't believe that, but there is actually a law above Facebook fact checkers, and that's the transcendent moral order. And then 3 is subsidiarity. You know, you couldn't have had any of the genocides or democides of the 20th century in societies that knew the truth about the human person, or that acknowledged the truth above opinion and power. And you couldn't have, even in societies that don't respect human dignity and don't acknowledge a transcendent moral order, if you have subsidiarity, if you have power devolved down close to the person, to the community, to the family, and not centralized, democides and genocides and total wars are impossible. Subsidiarity is a great check against tyranny. And so that's one thing all of us as Catholics should always seek to oppose: anything that takes power away from us and pushes it away. As I say, they say think global, act local. I say think local, act local. Let's keep it simple.
Yeah, you know, Jason, you're one of the expert guests we've got in our film Doomed to Repeat It, coming out in October, in April, hopefully next month, according to plan here. And we talk a lot about the power hungry tyrants out there and how they use primarily fear. Do you think that's happening even now with this constant kind of messaging of World War III that's out there? Do you think that there are people out there trying to push us towards a World War III, and they're trying to keep people kind of distracted in this kind of fear mode? What are your thoughts on that?
I do. And in about 5 or 6 years ago, when there was the big push in Syria to topple Assad, which would have led to the liquidation of the Alawites and the Christians there, because wherever Assad's forces were pushed back, not that he's a saintly man, but that ISIS was at war with Assad, and wherever Assad was pushed back, the Christians, the Kurds, the Alawites, the Yazidis were liquefied. I'd asked Tulsi Gabbard, at the time a member of Congress, someone I've known since she was young. I asked her, what is this lust to topple Assad when they know the consequences? She said, well, really the push is for war with Russia. That struck me as quite bizarre, but I never forgot it. She said that, there is the military industrial complex is pushing for war with Russia. It seems just unbelievable that there would be a lust for war with a country that has thousands of nuclear weapons. It just strikes one as unbelievable, reckless, dangerous. My daughter is getting married in June, my oldest daughter. She called me today and she said, Dad, is it even worth me getting married? I feel like, she lives in Hawaii. She says, I feel like we're on the verge of World War III. And I said, maybe, but people get married in wars. They fall in love during wars.
Yeah.
They have babies during wars. They die. People die in wars. That's a very normal way for a human being to die. When I had COVID pneumonia and I thought I was going to kick the bucket, I remember kind of smiling at my sickest moment. And I had this strange thought that, well, I'm in solidarity with so many humans. I get to die in a way so common, in a plague. This is a very normal way for humans to die. It's very normal for humans to die in war. So as Catholics, we should understand that. It's not normal to live to be 93 and die while watching Wheel of Fortune and eating Nilla wafers, drinking Earl Grey tea. That's what we all want. That's what I want. I want to die in a rocking chair in my 90s while eating Nilla wafers, watching World War II documentaries. But what is very common is for people to die in war, to die in the famines that wars cause, to die at the hands of tyrannical regimes or the economic collapse those tyrannical regimes caused. So we shouldn't feel sorry for ourselves because we live in normal times. We've lived in abnormal times. America is an abnormal country. There's that old saying that civilization is a thin layer of ice floating atop a sea of chaos. And maybe that thin layer of ice is dissolving, but that doesn't change anything for me as a Christian, as a Catholic. I'm called to love God and to love my neighbor. And in these challenging times where we're surrounded by vulnerable people, we're surrounded by scared people, we're surrounded by people we love who are being duped and hoodwinked by the most bizarre propaganda in each direction, then what we're to do is to be thoughtful, to stand with the vulnerable, to love God, love our neighbors, and proclaim the truth.
So, real quick question, Father, before you jump in there. By the way, I said something very similar to my son, who is also engaged to be married in the fall. And just last weekend, we talked a little bit about the fact that, we may be on the brink of this World War III. And if this does happen, this has happened before. And as devastating as it can be in many respects for different people, like right now, the people in Ukraine, they're feeling definitely a degree of devastation. But people still fall in love. I said essentially the same thing. Marriages still happen during wars. Men go off to fight. And in this case, even women now in the Ukraine, they're stepping up a lot now over there. Now, a couple of things. One, you mentioned to me earlier today, we were talking that some of the atrocities in Ukraine, even reports of Russian soldiers raping some of the Ukrainian women and so forth. Can you speak a bit about the degree of that? Because I think that needs to be on people's minds that, as you said earlier, very, very well, very clearly and pointedly, is that war is not, we should be doing everything we can to avoid this, and not just treat it as if, the U.S. is we should get them involved and go over and just clean house and get this over with. And the devastation, it could be off the rails, and it could become a World War III. Talk a bit about some of those atrocities, just enough so people can realize really the gravity of what's going on and why we should be stepping up our prayers and our support where we can to help organizations like yours. And then second, can you please bring in something about this Klaus Schwab character from the Great Reset? Here's a guy who has talked openly about thinking that we need a series of wars, if not a big war as well. Can you talk about the atrocities and about Schwab?
Yeah, well, first with the atrocities, you know, my work in Iraq and then before that in Sudan gave me maybe a small level of inoculation to the chaos of the past year. But there was nothing. It was one thing to be in Iraq and witness it. It's another to be in my home office with the sounds of my children outside playing when the people I'm trying to help are dying, that I'm communicating with every day. That was very challenging. And I had 2 employees literally have breakdowns. One had to be hospitalized. I have an employee today who is cracking under the stress of the work that we're doing in Ukraine. You know, so the kind of atrocities we've seen in Afghanistan were unbelievable. Young girls being set on fire, young girls being raped and sold, quite tragic. So when I heard these stories, you know, war propaganda has a ring to it, right? We're used to it. Remember in the first Gulf War, they said they were bayoneting babies in incubators. You remember that? Turned out to be a total lie. The girl that said she was there and witnessed it happened to be a student at Georgetown visitation. Her dad was an ambassador from Kuwait, and she wasn't in Iraq or Kuwait when that happened. So there are certain stories you're like, you know, I've heard these stories before. I didn't believe the stories of rape. So I called my ground team and I said, what are you hearing about rape? And they said, in fact, they know of definitely some documented instances where young women were raped. That they knew personally, that they had let Russian soldiers in naively to give them food. They had asked for food, and then the young girls were raped. And so, you know, when you unleash war, you're unleashing all sorts of horrible things. When you send 180,000 young men, and your orders are lawless. Your orders are lawless. And how do you expect? They're going to be in the midst of 108,000 young men. There are going to be young men who behave in a way that is lawless. So that is sadly true. I'm looking at the civilian casualties, and they're much lower than during our invasion of Iraq, right? So I wonder, the narrative in the Western media is that Russia is not using the Air Force because of their inability to wage a sophisticated air war, maybe, or maybe it's because they're thoughtful of the implications of civilian casualties. And so maybe I've never heard anyone mention, maybe they're trying to keep civilian casualties down. I don't know. But what I do know is, first and foremost, Russia has to leave Ukraine. NATO and the EU need to turn down the rhetoric and stop all this talk about Ukraine joining NATO. They need to come to an agreement that makes Russia feel safe, the countries of NATO feel safe, the NATO partners feel safe, but most importantly, the playground of these great powers, Ukraine, that's being wrecked, the way we wrecked Afghanistan, the way we wrecked Iraq. Now to Klaus Schwab. I mean, look, this guy is a villain. These guys are they're spooky. Like we've all seen the pictures of this. He dresses like an alien, and he says things that match his dress. He says very strange things. Or Bill Gates, and Bill Gates has been saying since the early 1990s that by 2030, we need to reduce the world population down to 500 million. And you hear that, and you have to ask yourself, how are you going to do that?
Well, and if anybody's questioning that, Jason, that is actually written on the guidestones, the Masonic Freemason guidestones in Georgia. This was like a monument. It's like a modern day Stonehenge type of thing put up back in the 80s, I believe. Anyway, you get a picture of it here on the screen, and they actually have almost like a 10 commandments of the Masons. And the number one commandment is reducing the population to roughly 500 million, which means we have to eliminate approximately 7.3 billion people from the planet right now. And you're right, it is spooky. Gates, I know, and Schwab, they've talked about like transhumanism ideas. Schwab has talked about the fourth industrial revolution, and that would be primarily this almost impossible to detect union or fusion between the human and AI, artificial intelligence. This is crazy stuff, but these people are hell bent, it seems like, on getting us to a place where these things can start to happen more. So, I mean, they believed that what we just went through with the last couple of years was a plus for them because it would help us be more ready to accept the Great Reset ideas. So Schwab has been open to the idea of war as part of this scenario, hasn't he?
Yeah, no, and that's right. And so when people, it's understandable, then people want to hope that Putin is some great warrior against this brave new world. But I say we're dealing with brave new world versus 1984. I don't want either of them. And a scandal is stumbling block, right? We know that. But a stumbling block can be a stepping stone. And I'm going to quote Chesterton here. Chesterton said, life should be a raid, a great adventure. And for us as for us as Catholic men, Doug, for you and I as lay Catholic men, we're in the midst of a great adventure, a raid. And the adventure is in a world that has collapsed again into the most atrocious type of subhumanism, a dark, nihilist, atheist, ugly subhumanism. We should be running towards the battle, proclaiming the dignity of the human person, its source, and that we were created by a loving God that holds us into existence, loves us. We want everyone to see God, man, and the world the way we do. And it's a very dark, lonely world. When you look at Klaus Schwab, read Klaus Schwab's writing on the one hand, and then read Alexander Dugin. You really can't even get Alexander Dugin now, because something that's quite frightening, and in one of my articles, I said, stop with the freedom talk with our war with Ukraine. You can't use freedom as you're locking us up for going to protests, calling homeschool PTO moms domestic terrorists, and clubbing truckers in the head. Stop using, you can't use freedom anymore to whip us into a war frenzy. But I knew I gave away a lot of my Dugin books. I've been studying Dugin for about 2 years because he's frightening. And I said, I need to replenish my Dugin library. Well, guess what? They banned all his books. So I went to eBay. I said, maybe I can still get them on eBay. You can get them on eBay. Even his own publisher in America doesn't sell his books. They shut down RT. But then I hear in the Western media, shocked that Putin's shutting down the Western media. We're shutting down the Russian media. If we're the free world, I should be able to read Alexander Dugin. Not because I'm an admirer of Alexander Dugin, but I need to know the ideology that's fueling Putin. It's quite frightening. And the hypocrisy is unbelievable. They celebrate that we're shutting down RT and we're shutting down Russian misinformation sites. But then when Putin shuts down our sites and calls them misinformation sites that he's shutting down, we act horrified that such a tyrant could do such a thing. And so there is no more city on the hill. There is no free world versus tyranny. We are awash in tyranny. We're surrounded by hordes of illiberal tyrants. And but for us as Catholic men, this is the time, right? Yeah. This is the time to push back. And so Klaus Schwab is horrifying. It's unnatural. You can look to Putin and say it's kind of we've dealt with guys like Putin before, right? We've seen him throughout human history. Throughout recorded history, there are thugs and tyrants, criminals like Putin in power. But the Klaus Schwabs, the Bill Gateses, the Faucis, these are a strange new kind of creature that we're really not used to dealing with, right? But
good point.
All we need to do is promote the incomparable dignity of the human person, the transcendent moral order, subsidiarity, a humane economy grounded in private property rights, set within care for the community and the commonwealths, and then finally, solidarity, that we leave no one abandoned from the community. We leave no one outside of protection, that we stand with those who are outcast, who are vulnerable, who are thrown away. If we do that as Catholics, we'll have a culture of life, and we should do it courageously. And whether it's standing with those Afghans, SIVs, who after years can't get their visas processed, even though we promised to them, and now they're hiding in Afghanistan, trying not to be caught by the Taliban and killed, yet the woke left is processing Ukrainian visas in 3 days.
Yeah.
Wow.
Jason,
there are American green card holders, Afghans, whose wife and children can't come to America because the State Department's asleep. What are they doing? They're not processing their visas, but now they've promised to process Ukrainians in 3 days.
Yeah.
Now I'm serving the Ukrainians. But how are we forgetting about the Afghans who are vulnerable because they served for us?
Mhm.
Right. Jason, I was going to say, Doug and I were so excited to have you on tonight because you're so dedicated, resolved to first of all, dig up the truth, because it's not easy to do that nowadays. The propaganda is just like historic right now. And your dedication to bring out the truth and proclaim it. And can I get your feedback on this? Doug, you've heard me say it. I think our viewers have heard me say this before, but I'm in the school of thought that believes that we're in an era of exposing things, of revealing things, and that's a lot of, in God's this is again, it's my feeling, and I think there's a school of thought about this, but in God's permissive will, He's allowing some things so that a bright light can shine on this horrible evil that we're in, and also to motivate us. You just got done saying it. We got to get going. We shared this quote, I think, on the last episode, but I want to share it again. It's hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. I mean, I think we're in that last part right now, but the hard times is awakening, especially men, but we include women in that. There's an awakening going on. I'm seeing it everywhere. I wish it was faster and I wish it was bigger, but it's happening. And can I get your opinion on that? Are we in a period where this arrogant evil that just is waltzing in under the bright sunlight and telling us to just sit down and shut up because it just feels like it has that kind of power right now? Can I get your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this hard times, I think there are hard times. I like that saying, but I think if we just look back at our own families, I look at my grandfather. My grandfather, as a young man, went off to World War II.
Right.
Came home to start a family. Then there was the Korean War. My grandfather's father was a war orphan. That came to America, didn't know his parents, took the name Peter Jones. He only knew his first name, Johannes. I don't know what my orphan great-grandfather's life was like. My father had a dad who had been shattered by two horrible wars and lived in a culture in collapse through the 60s and 70s, that the cultural collapse that the baby boomers lived through. So I definitely think that my generation, I was born in 1971, we have lived in an unprecedented time of decadence. Yeah. And we maybe will be the ones that in the later years of our life will have to do some great suffering. And I guess there's a privilege to that, because I guess when we suffer, we're thoughtful of God. And I'd like to be thoughtful of God the closer I am to meeting him. Right. As you know, we say as Catholics, so we can cram for the final exam. Yeah. I think we as Americans may be in store for some empathy generating experiences. We've lacked empathy. We've had multiple wars in our lifetime where I think we've been very callous in the cost of those wars to the people that lived in the places where we fought those wars. Young people today, I think, have it harder than our grandparents or great-grandparents did, because they're being taught to not even know their gender. How bizarre is that? That before they even think of holding a girl's hand, they've seen the worst kinds of pornography. They'll never know what it's like to slow skate at a roller rink and, some girl skate up to them and ask to hold their hand, because if that ever happens, which it probably will never happen, they've been looking at hardcore pornography since they even had a desire to, because of just curiosity or classmates shoving it in their face. Yeah. So I think, we are in a way living in the most unprecedented of challenging times. Yeah. And so we as lay Catholic men, and we're lulled to sleep because we can be very, very comfortable. And God forbid this metaverse, I don't even want to think about what that's going to do to us as a people.
Right.
But yeah, this may be one of the hardest. I think that the young people today may be living in one of the hardest times in human history. And what makes it so challenging, it is sort of this brave new world where they're not suffering. Our grandparents used to say, I had to walk to school uphill both ways through the snow, and I had to milk the cow before school, and I'd hunt for rabbits after school so we could have meat with our stew. Wow, that sounds like a daydream. Then I came home to a house with no parents because I don't know my dad. My mom has 2 jobs, and I don't play with my friends outside. I don't even have to work. I'm just staring at a screen all day. I have no intimacy. I have no close friends. I mean, that's quite tragic, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, and then sadly, some of them grow up, live in their parents' basement, and become fact checkers for Facebook, and it just goes south from there. I mean, you paint a picture there, though, and based on Father's question there, and I agree. Things are unprecedented right now with regards to the disorder and dysfunction of so many areas of the formation of our young people today, and where do we go? Where do we get out of this? And I know there's been a lot of talk about, well, we need this program and that program. And, I think what Father put together with his book, Peace Through Strength Prayer Journal, about just getting the diabolical out of your life by getting closer to Christ, getting closer to God, the relationship with God, teaching people what it means to have mental prayer, to contemplate, think about, ponder, just put God in your mind and have beautiful images around you, like the statue of Our Lady of Fatima and so forth. I mean, just these basic things that are rudimentary and fundamental that help form us. We're in the middle of our open right now with Battle Ready Coalition, encouraging people to sign up, and we just do monthly training with videos and live talks to encourage people, just these very basic, fundamental, important things. Jason, if we don't have these basic, fundamental, important things, such as what Father's trying to do, what Father and I are trying to do with the Grace Force, and what we're trying to do with BRC, and Father is our unofficial chaplain of the Battle Ready Coalition, unofficial only because his bishop hasn't appointed him that, but he's
get me strong.
That's it. He's getting in shape.
All in, baby.
Guns are going, and yeah, there you go. So with all of this, though, Jason, and I know we're getting close to the end here, and I want to make sure we get your comment on this. The title of this, Ukraine, a breath away from World War III, ? Honestly, where do you see this going? I mean, I'm not trying to sound like you're prophetic, but as you said to me earlier today, you're connecting dots and you're doing the math. And, unless it's Common Core math, I think we talked about that. But if it's real math and you connect the figures, you put them all together, where do you honestly think this goes? Like, I just don't see Putin pulling out of Ukraine tomorrow. I don't see the warmongers, from the Klaus Schwabs to the Alexander Dugins and even some in our political realm who are calling. I mean, they've literally come out, some of them, and said that Putin needs to be assassinated. I mean, this is just incredible what we're seeing. I just don't see all this turning on a dime. I don't see our gas prices going down. I see them continuing to go up, and people continuing to be squeezed, and the siege that seems to be laid to us on all these different levels. Many of our church leaders are either complicit in many of the problems we're dealing with in the world, or they're just afraid. There's some fear there. God bless, great priests like not to flatter our friend here, Father Heilman, but he is outspoken on the battlefield, swinging away. But in your humble opinion, Jason, where do you think this honestly goes from where we are right now?
Well, I've heard it said that this quote from Mother Teresa, I've never verified it, that she said that the fruit of abortion is nuclear war. I did read a speech from the late 40s from Archbishop Fulton Sheen, the time Monsignor Fulton Sheen, I believe, that when we had dropped the atomic bomb on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, that we paved the way for an eventual legalization of abortion in America, because that was the day America said there are no limits to the use of violence. I would say that a society that has its gym shoes and electronics made by slaves, millions of slaves in forced labor camps in China, a people that does that will perish in global thermonuclear war. I just don't think that's much of a leap. That we had the Beijing Genocide Olympics, where all of these brands that have, deplatformed Russia in the blink of an eye are partners with the CCP in the exploitation and rape of the Uyghur people, 3 million people in concentration camps, having their organs harvested, women raped, married off to Han Chinese. This is happening, and Nike and Apple partner with the CCP and countless regimes. So a people that does that shouldn't be surprised when their children and grandchildren die of famine or die in a war, because they've accepted that there are no limits to the use of violence, that there is nothing sacred or dignified or beautiful about the human person, and that those chickens will come home to roost. So then what is our job as Catholics? I think that in our age, our apostolate is to tell the truth about the human person. C.S. Lewis said that God must put a filter before our eyes, because if we could see each other as we really are, we couldn't walk down the street, because the first person we came across, we would drop to our knees and stare at them in awe. I've thought of doing that, just walk down the street and everyone I see just drop to my knees and stare at them in awe. But I think that is the grace that God has given us. And those of us who are watching the show, I think something that the grace that we've been given that we share in common is that we know the truth about the human person. Mm-hmm. We live in a world where that is the greatest treasure and greatest privilege. If there's one thing that we can know, it would be that. I was an atheist till my late 20s, and I say that I found God in the mirror. And what I mean by I found God in the mirror, I found God in his mirror, is I found God in the creature made in his image. I, as an atheist, could not understand how human beings could have such a profound dignity. And I searched everywhere, before I looked at Christianity. And when I finally read the Jewish scriptures in the New Testament, because I gave up, I had read Sartre, and he had said, and Nietzsche and Freud, and they had dismantled any hope for human dignity. But they were the ones that said that this idea of human dignity is really Christian anthropology. So I say that it was Freud and Nietzsche and Sartre that pointed me, really, that said, hey, you better look and see what they have to say. And I looked, and I found the source for the truth of the human person, and that's our Creator. Well, so what a grace that we have this. And so we're going to be, we're culpable for that knowledge. So we need to be fearless. I joked with you before the interview that this article I wrote on Ukraine is going to alienate people on both sides. And I said it was my 1,000th attempt at career suicide. But why write an article unless I'm going to say something that's true?
Right.
And why should I speak the truth only when it doesn't come at a risk?
Right.
I think it's the opposite. As Catholic men, maybe we should only speak when it's a truth that comes at a risk and no one else is saying it. Other than that, I'm just going to shut up. Unfortunately, right now, there are a lot of true things that need to be said that people are fearful of saying. And so that's where it is our responsibility to speak up. Why? Because of our concern for the vulnerable. Politics is important because people are important. And the decisions our political leaders make have unimaginable impacts on human beings. The decision of the Biden administration to so thoughtlessly and clumsily leave Afghanistan has leading to a famine, an unimaginable famine, unspeakable violence. I get messages every day in Facebook, LinkedIn, Signal, WhatsApp from young girls crying in broken English, begging for us to rescue them. And they were all made vulnerable because of decisions that our elected leaders make. When Lindsey Graham, who seems to really get a thrill when he talks about violence, although I bet he's never even been in a fist fight, he's never been punched in the nose, he's never even played Pop Warner football. I can't imagine that a man talks like that, has any experience with what violence is really like. Talks about assassinating a foreign head of state. And why would he say something like that? It's not his children that are going to suffer by antagonizing a lunatic like Putin, and someone who's drunk with power and addled with a sick ideology of Alexander Dugin. Why would he say that? Clearly, he's thoughtless. He's thoughtless to other people's suffering. Mel Brooks said the tragedy, comedy is when you look out your window, you see someone walking down the street, they fall through an empty manhole sewer, break their neck and die. That's comedy. Tragedy is when you stub your toe. right? And when I hear these politicians speak about war so casually, but then you reflect on other things that they've said where they felt like January 6th was this horrible insurrection, this unimaginable, unspeakable act of violence. Yeah, okay. All right, sure it was, buddy. But you're going to talk about a war overseas with a smile on your face, and you're going to be giddy. Really unbelievable.
Yeah.
So true, Jason. It's time for us. I got my T-shirt. I don't know if people can see this. Get strong. It's time for us to get strong. And I want to share one of my favorite quotes. We maintain the peace through our strength. Weakness only invites aggression. We're weak, and we're making especially women and children vulnerable. It's time for us to get strong.
Yeah.
So let's end with a prayer. This prayer is actually one that I grabbed from the bishops of Ukraine. In the name of the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, amen. Amen. Through the intercession of Saint Michael, may God soften the hearts and minds of all, those within and outside Ukraine during these dangerous times. May Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thanks so much, Jason.
Jason, thanks, brother. Great to have you on again.
It's a privilege to be on, and Doug, I hope you can join us again sometime.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this great podcast that you two have.
It was a privilege.
Very much.
Hey, make sure you give us 5 stars, like and share with your friends.
I will. I'll spread it throughout the land. Yes.
All right, thanks, guys.